The day I stopped chasing my dreams felt responsible. No drama. No crisis. Just a quiet decision that sounded like maturity. I told myself I was choosing peace over pressure, stability over uncertainty, comfort over chaos. I believed I was finally doing what adults are supposed to do. I was wrong. Back then, my life wasn't perfect, but it was alive. I had goals that kept me awake at night, ideas that made my heart race, plans that felt risky but meaningful. I wasn't successful, but I was engaged with my own future. Then reality arrived. Bills. Expectations. Responsibilities. The kind that don't ask for permission. Slowly, my ambitions started feeling impractical. People around me began using words like realistic and sensible. They weren't trying to crush my dreams. They were trying to protect me. And I let them. I didn't give up everything at once. I adjusted. Smaller goals. Safer plans. Less uncertainty. Nothing felt like a loss at first. It felt like progress. I found a stable job. Not exciting, but dependable. My days became predictable, my income consistent, my future structured. People congratulated me for settling down. And I smiled. Because on paper, my life finally made sense. But meaning doesn't come from structure. It comes from direction. And my direction had quietly disappeared. At night, when everything was quiet, I felt a strange absence inside me. Not sadness. Silence. The silence of not wanting anything strongly anymore. No big dreams. No restless energy. No sense of movement. Just routine. Wake up. Work. Sleep. Repeat. My life had become calm. And calm can feel like emptiness if it lasts too long. I told myself that this was adulthood. That the excitement of youth fades and gets replaced by responsibility. That stability is the real goal. But deep inside, I felt something fading. Not my energy. My purpose. I stopped asking myself what I wanted. I started asking what was reasonable. My decisions were based on comfort instead of passion. My future was designed for safety instead of fulfillment. And safety, when it becomes your main goal, shrinks your world. My conversations changed too. I talked about work, schedules, practical plans. I stopped talking about ideas, dreams, or the kind of future that once made me feel alive. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I had stopped believing in those things. The quiet life didn't hurt me. It slowly erased me. I didn't feel lost. I felt neutral. And neutrality is dangerous. Because when nothing feels wrong, nothing changes. I wasn't unhappy. I was unfulfilled. There's a difference. Unhappiness screams. Unfulfillment whispers. And whispers can be ignored for years. One evening, I ran into someone I used to know. Someone who had taken risks, chased uncertain goals, lived a life that didn't always make sense but felt real. They looked tired. But alive. When they asked me how I was doing, I said, good. Everything's stable. And they smiled politely. But their eyes didn't. Later that night, I thought about that look. Not judgment. Recognition. They saw something in me I had been avoiding. The version of myself that had chosen safety over meaning. I realized I hadn't failed at my dreams. I had quietly walked away from them. Not because I was incapable. Because I was afraid of uncertainty. And uncertainty is where purpose lives. My life had become easier. But easier doesn't mean better. It means quieter. Less movement. Less passion. Less reason to wake up excited. I had chosen peace. But I had lost direction. And without direction, peace feels like standing still while life moves past you. I wasn't depressed. I was disconnected. Disconnected from the part of myself that once wanted more than comfort. The quiet life hadn't given me happiness. It had given me silence. And silence, when it replaces meaning, feels heavy. The quiet didn't arrive all at once. It grew. Like dust settling on a shelf you stop looking at. At first, I enjoyed the simplicity. No big risks, no emotional turbulence, no constant pressure to become something more. My life felt organized, predictable, controlled. But control has a strange side effect. It removes urgency. And urgency is what makes life feel alive. My days began to blur together. Not because they were bad but because they were identical. The same routes, the same conversations, the same goals that didn't really feel like goals anymore. They felt like maintenance. I wasn't building a future. I was preserving a routine. The ambitions I once had didn't disappear dramatically. They faded quietly, like music in another room. Still there, but too distant to move me. I stopped feeling excited about anything new. Not because nothing good was happening but because nothing meaningful was. There's a difference between comfort and fulfillment. Comfort makes you relax. Fulfillment makes you feel alive. I had chosen comfort. And comfort had slowly hollowed me out. I began noticing how often I avoided questions about my future. Not the practical ones, those were easy. I had answers for income, housing, stability. But when people asked what I wanted, I hesitated. Not because I was unsure. Because I didn't want to admit that I had stopped wanting anything deeply. My life was safe. But it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to expectations, routines, and a version of adulthood that values quiet over meaning. I had become efficient at existing. Not at living. One night, while scrolling through old photos, I found images from years ago. Not achievements. Not milestones. Moments. Me laughing without restraint. Me talking about ideas with fire in my eyes. Me believing in futures that weren't guaranteed. That person felt distant. Not because time had passed. Because I had chosen a different path. A quieter one. The version of me in those photos wasn't reckless. They were alive. And I had traded that aliveness for stability. Not because I had to. Because I was afraid of uncertainty. Uncertainty had once felt like opportunity. Now, it felt like risk. And I had decided risk wasn't worth it anymore. But removing risk also removes growth. And without growth, life becomes repetition. I started feeling a strange kind of sadness. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Existential. The sadness of knowing your life is functioning but not evolving. The sadness of realizing you've become a background character in your own story. I wasn't unhappy with what I had. I was disappointed with what I wasn't becoming. The quiet life had protected me from failure. But it had also protected me from purpose. Purpose doesn't live in safety. It lives in direction. And my direction had disappeared. I wasn't moving toward anything. I was just maintaining what already existed. That realization didn't hurt. It weighed. Like a slow, constant pressure on my chest. I began questioning things I had never questioned before. Why did I stop dreaming? When did practical replace meaningful? Who was I becoming comfortable? For the answers weren't simple. But they were honest. I had chosen a life that didn't demand much from me. And in return, it gave me very little. Not pain. Not chaos. Just emptiness. The kind that grows in silence. I wasn't stuck. I was settling. And settling, when it lasts too long, feels like self-betrayal. I had betrayed my own potential not through failure, but through avoidance. Avoidance of risk. Avoidance of uncertainty. Avoidance of myself. The quiet life had made me invisible to my own ambitions. And ambition, when ignored, turns into regret. Not loud regret. Quiet regret. The kind that waits for you at night. The moment of clarity didn't come with drama. There was no breakdown. No sudden decision. No life-changing announcement. It came quietly, the same way my purpose had disappeared. One ordinary evening, I was sitting alone in my apartment, listening to the hum of the city outside. Cars passed. Lights flickered in distant windows. Life continued full, loud, moving forward. And I felt completely still. Not peaceful. Stuck. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to ask a dangerous question: if nothing in my life changed from this point on, would I be okay with that? The answer came without hesitation. No. Not because my life was bad. Not because I was unhappy. Because it felt unfinished. I realized something painful: I hadn't chosen a quiet life because it suited me. I had chosen it because it required less courage. It didn't demand growth. It didn't demand uncertainty. It didn't demand risk. It only demanded consistency. And consistency is easy when nothing meaningful is at stake. My younger self had dreamed loudly. My current self existed quietly. Somewhere between responsibility and fear, I had traded purpose for comfort. Not intentionally. Gradually. The worst part wasn't that I had stopped chasing my dreams. It was that I had stopped believing they mattered. I had convinced myself that wanting more was childish, that ambition was naive, that fulfillment was optional as long as life remained stable. But stability without meaning feels like surviving, not living. I wasn't living. I was maintaining. And maintenance doesn't leave a legacy. It leaves a routine. I thought about all the versions of myself I never became, not because I failed, but because I never tried. Paths I never explored. Risks I never took. Futures I never allowed myself to imagine fully. Not out of laziness. Out of fear. Fear of instability. Fear of disappointment. Fear of not being practical. But practicality had cost me my direction. I hadn't lost my purpose. I had buried it under comfort. And comfort had become my excuse. Excuse to stay small. Excuse to stay safe. Excuse to stay quiet. But quiet doesn't feel like peace anymore when it lasts too long. It feels like absence. I didn't want to wake up 10 years from now and realize I had lived a life that never challenged me, never moved me, never asked me to grow. Not because I needed chaos. Because I needed meaning. Meaning comes from movement. Movement comes from risk. And risk comes from believing your life is worth more than convenience. I didn't need to destroy my stable life. I needed to expand it. To let uncertainty back in. To let ambition breathe again. To let myself want something deeply. Not recklessly. Intentionally. I started with small changes. Not dramatic ones. I allowed myself to dream again quietly, privately, honestly. I explored ideas without immediately killing them with logic. I made space for curiosity instead of dismissing it. I stopped treating fulfillment like a luxury. And started treating it like a necessity. My life didn't suddenly become exciting. But it became mine again. I felt direction return, not as pressure, but as purpose. I wasn't chasing success. I was chasing alignment. Alignment between who I was and how I lived. The quiet life had taught me how to exist. But existence alone isn't enough. A meaningful life requires intention. And intention requires courage. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that lets you choose growth even when comfort feels easier. If you're listening to this and your life feels calm but empty, I want you to know something: peace without purpose feels hollow. Stability without direction feels heavy. And safety without meaning feels small. You don't need to escape your life. You need to reclaim it. By choosing growth over comfort. Meaning over convenience. Purpose over silence. Because a quiet life is only beautiful when it's filled with intention. Otherwise, it's just silence pretending to be peace. I chose a quiet life. Now, I choose a meaningful one. Not louder. Not perfect. Just alive.